السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وشفينا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Respected listeners, this is a discussion on the double-slit experiment that is found in quantum theory. The reason we're discussing this subject is to help us to increase our understanding of the power and the overwhelming control Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exercises over each of us and over every single particle in the universe. This is by no means a discussion on trying to validate or affirm the Quran and Sunnah. The Quran and Sunnah rather are regarded as two immutable, irrefutable truths, and rather we will measure quantum theory against the Quran and the Sunnah. In this discussion, we are not too concerned with the technical aspects of quantum theory, but more importantly, we are interested in the philosophical implications and the concepts of Allah's power of all seeing and all hearing and all knowing, and how understanding these realities can elevate our level of certainty. Now, many Muslims find it not necessary or find it unnecessary to venture down these paths because they say, well, we know Allah has control over everything. But the reality is, if we really believed that Allah is in control of everything, if we really believed that Allah is in control of everything, that Allah is the provider and the sustainer and the nourisher, then we would be living very different lives. So while we have the knowledge, the certainty and the reality hasn't entered our hearts. And the purpose of this discussion is to try and use this as a tonic to motivate us into more meaningful action, which will help us to learn more meaningful lives. We take a lesson of trying to strengthen our certainty from Ibrahim alayhi salam in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 260, when Ibrahim alayhi salam said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّي أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. And when Ibrahim alayhi salam said to Allah, Ya Allah, show me how you give life to the dead, Allah said, قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ. Don't you believe? قَالَ بَلَى. He said, indeed I do. وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. But I wish to strengthen my heart. So the reason we're looking at this aspect of science is to strengthen our hearts. And whereas the secularists have this understanding that science is the explanation of the way the world works, excluding or removing Allah from the equation, for us as Muslims, science is actually understanding the way Allah works, because science is the explanation of Allah's law in the universe. And when we understand the way Allah's systems and His laws work, the beauty and the perfection of it, then we're filled with awe and respect, and we begin to understand and appreciate the majesty and the splendor of our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. Basically, quantum theory is around for about 100 years. 100 years ago, scientists discovered that the atom was not the smallest particle in the universe. In 1897, J.J. Thomson discovered the electron. In 1911, Ernest Rutherford discovered the nucleus of the atom, and scientists then discovered that there's a new world of subatomic particles. Before we continue, I need to just explain to you the difference between particle and wave also. This material is a bit technical and a bit abstract, so you may have to watch it more than once or look at some of the other videos that we're going to attach to this discussion on our website. But just for purposes of understanding, of explanation, scientists for 200 years believed that light was a wave, because a wave spreads all over, and when we look at light coming out from our light bulb, we can't touch it and we can't see exactly where it is. It spreads evenly in all directions, and this is why we call it a wave. But in 1905, Einstein discovered that light has a particle nature. This is in his explanation of the photoelectric effect, because photons were ejecting electrons from metallic surfaces, and Einstein won the Nobel Prize in 1921 for this work on the wave-particle duality of light. In 1924, another scientist by the name of Louis de Broglie, or de Broglie, de Broglie is proper pronunciation, looked at Einstein's equations and he said, but this understanding holds true for all matter, not only for light, that all matter has a wave and a particle reality. And he used Einstein's equations to explain that, and he was the first man to win the Nobel Prize for his PhD thesis, which was based on this explanation that all matter has a wave and a particle reality. Now basically, if we look at light acting as a wave and we shine a single beam of light through one slit, then what we should get is a bright beam, a single band, like we see on the screen here. And if we were to emit or to shine a beam of light through two slits, which we can see here coming out through, then the light interferes with itself and it makes a diffraction pattern, and the result is these bold stripes followed by shadows, and this we call an interference pattern. Now we know from logic that if we were to fire, say, tennis balls through two holes or through one hole, we'll only get one band, and if we were to fire it through two holes, we would get two bands, as we see in the illustration here. Similarly, if we had to take a gun and fire a gun through two holes, we would find two strips of bullet holes on the other side of the wall, just as we see in this picture, depending on which hole the bullets went through. So when we look at quantum physics, we are first of all looking at particles on the very small scale, what we call below the Planck scale. And above the Planck scale is what we call matter or Newtonian physics, where things on the macro scale, where we're dealing with big particles like you and I and phones and cars and everything that we can feel and touch. And beneath the Planck scale, we are dealing with things so small that we need fine instrumentation to be able to detect them and to measure them. Now, the smallest particle, or the fundamental particle we find first, is a photon, which is a particle of light. Just to give you an understanding, a bulb of light, like the one above me now, is emitting 10 to the power 19 photons per second, which is something like about 10 million trillion photons per second. And here we're talking about one photon. So one photon is a small particle of light which has no mass. Now, what's important about the photon is that the photon is the energy that allows the movement of electrons. Electrons can move from one level to another by absorbing a photon or by emitting a photon. So photons are what determines the energy of electrons. Electrons, as we see these small flickering dots on the screen, those are the electrons in the atom. The electron determines the nature of the atom. So every atom differs to another only by the number of electrons. If the electrons are the same, then the atom is the same. If the electrons differ, then obviously the atom is different. And atoms gather together to form molecules. So when we look at the essential particle is light. Light is at the basis of matter, because the electron is what gives the atom its quality, and the atom is the small particle of matter or is the particle on which all matter is built. And atoms form into molecules, and these molecules then form all different kinds of matter. So whether we're looking at the water in the ocean, or a rock formation, or plants or trees in the forest, or human beings, buildings, cell phones, all these things are made up of molecules, which are made up of atoms, which are determined by the number of electrons, and those are determined by the photons. So when we go below the Planck scale, what the Broglie was theorizing is that when we go beneath the Planck scale, all matter behaves just like light, that they have the exact same qualities. They have wave-like properties, and they can behave like particles. Now, to test this theory, scientists have to carry out the same experiments that they carried out on light. So just like with light, when we fired light through one slit, we found one bright band. Scientists decided to fire one atom through one slit, and we find, as we see in the picture, one band. Now, the thing about this experiment, whether it's done with photons or with electrons or with atoms, and very recently it's been done with molecules of a certain size, we find the same outcome. When we fire atoms through one slit, we find one band, just as with the light. The interesting thing that happens is that when we fire atoms through two slits, we find, instead of two bands, we find the same interference pattern. We find the lines and the shadows, just like we find with light. But atoms are small particles of matter, just like balls. If we fire two balls through two holes, as we've seen in the picture earlier, we should just get two bands. But in this case, we're firing atoms, which are small particles, and we're finding an interference pattern. And this baffled scientists. So what they then decided to do was to fire these atoms one at a time through the two slits, and after an hour of firing these atoms one at a time, the same pattern emerged, which meant that the atoms were going through both slits at the same time, just as a wave. But these are particles of matter. So it bemuses the mind how it is that they can exist in waveform. So scientists then decided, let's put a detector and see which hole they are really going through. And the amazing thing is that when they put on the detector and they started firing the atoms started going through the holes one at a time. So it only gave two bands. So this was even more strange. When the atoms were not being watched, they went through both at the same time and gave an interference pattern. And when a detector was placed, it seemed that the atoms were only going through one slit at a time and made the double band pattern, just like balls would have made. So this meant somehow that the atom knew that it was being watched. So the scientists then decided to switch off the detector. And when the detector was switched off, the interference pattern appeared again, almost as if the atom knew that the detector was now off. And this is where the whole quantum enigma emerged. Now, we should deduce 3 important bits of information, or make 3 important deductions from what we've just seen. Is that when the detector was put on, when there was observation, then the wave function collapsed. That meant the atom went from acting like a wave and going through both holes at the same time to behaving like a particle, just like a ball. It went through one hole at a time. That's the first important thing. The second thing is the particle was aware that it was being watched. So this particle actually possesses consciousness. And we're talking of physical experiments which have been conducted many times over and verified, and which are verified by mathematical formulae. And the third important deduction is that at the fundamental level, below the Planck scale, matter and light are actually all the same. They all have one common source or one common foundation, which is energy. And energy is a synonym for light. Light and energy are basically the same thing. So let's 3 points to consider from this experiment. The first is the observer, and then the second thing to look at is the particle, and the third is to look at the human being and the role he plays in the experiment. So first we have to look at the role of the observer. The observer causes the wave function to collapse by consciously observing. What this means basically is that everything that is in particle form, everything that we can touch and feel, anything that has mass and occupies space, only exists in that form because it is being watched. So this means that you and I and everything we see and touch, the stars and the moon and the planets and our phones and computers, all exists in particle form only because there is an observer that's observing it. So we should look at a verse in the Quran, Surah Fussilat, verse 53. Allah says, سَنُرِيمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقِّ. We will show them our signs in the universe and in themselves until it becomes absolutely true to them that this is the truth. And then beautifully Allah says, أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِي بِرَبِّكَ أَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. Is it not sufficient that Allah is witnessing everything? And the power of the statement is that it brings us understanding to us that the mere fact that you and I exist, that we look at each other, that we can speak to each other, is a sign that we are being observed. What does that then mean? If we only exist because we are being observed, that means the observer can never tire or sleep, because if he sleeps or if he gets tired, we will cease to exist. The sun, for example, may cease to exist, and life as we know it will change. So the particular reality of things demands that we have, or that the quantum world or the world of matter requires an observer that never tires or never sleeps. So let's just look at this beautiful verse in the Quran. This is the greatest verse in the Quran, Ayatul Kursi. Allah says, Allahu la ilaha illahu. Allah, there is no God but He. Al-Hayyu Al-Qayyum, the ever-living. Al-Qayyum, and the one that sustains everything or keeps everything in existence. La ta'khudhuhu sinatu wa la nawm. No slumber can seize Him, nor sleep. له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض. Everything belongs to him, that's in the heavens and the earth. مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعُ عِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. And who can intercede for you except with his permission? يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُم. He knows what is before them and what is behind them. And we're going to get this in the second experiment of quantum physics, which is called the quantum eraser theory, to understand how Allah knows what is in the future. وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. And no one can comprehend anything of his knowledge except as he wills. وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And his kursi, his throne, his power, his dominion extends over the heavens and the earth. وَلَا يَؤُودُ حِفْظُهُمَا. And he feels no fatigue in guarding and preserving them. وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. And he is the most high and the most great. So, second thing of the observer, he cannot tire and he cannot sleep because he is keeping everything in existence. The third important thing to note about the observer is that through his observation, everything exists. And let's see if this is consistent with the Quran and the Sunnah. And we have a beautiful hadith reported in Sahih Muslim. Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ لَا يَنَامُ وَلَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ أَنْ يَنَامُ. That Allah doesn't sleep. Allah, great and glorious is He, doesn't sleep, and it doesn't befit Him to sleep. يَخْفِضُ الْقِسْطَ وَيَرْفَعُهُ. He lowers the scale and He lifts it. يُرْفَعُ إِلَيْهِ عَمَلُ اللَّيْلِ قَبْلَ عَمَلِ النَّهَارِ. The deeds of the night are raised up to Him, or taken up to Him before the deeds of the day. وَعَمَلُ النَّهَارِ قَبْلَ عَمَلِ اللَّيْلِ. And the deeds of the day before the deeds of the night. And then importantly, the hadith says, حِجَابُهُ نُورٌ. His veil is light. لَوْ كَشَفَهُ. And if he were to remove it, لَأَحْرَقَتْ سُبُحَاتُ وَجْهِهِ. The splendor of his countenance, مَنْتَهَا إِلَيْهِ بَصَرٌ مِّنْ خَلْقِهِ. Would consume his creation as far as his sight reaches. Which gives us this understanding that everything is existing only because of the vision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next important thing is that the observer encompasses all vision, but vision cannot encompass him. In quantum physics, quantum physicists have a problem they call the problem of measurement, because the instrumentation to measure particles in the quantum world is light, and every time they focus light on a particle, it changes the nature of the particle. So the one that controls the quantum world has to encompass all vision. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us beautifully in the Quran, in Surah Al-An'am, لا تدرك الأبصار. That vision cannot grasp him. وَهُوَ يُدْرِكُ الْأَبْصَارِ. But he grasps all vision. And then Allah says, وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. And one of the meanings of latif is subtle. So Allah is subtle in His knowledge. Al-Khabir, and He is acquainted with all things. So what we're learning from this is that the observer is keeping everything in existence. The observer cannot tire and not sleep. The observer, through his vision, maintains everything in creation. And the observer observes everything, and vision can't observe him. The next important thing we have to look at is the particle. And basically, three things we're going to look at the particle: that every particle possesses consciousness and therefore has to recognize its creator. Each particle is not only observed, but it's in a clear record. And each and every particle responds to Allah's command. So every single particle possesses consciousness and recognizes its creator. Allah says to us in Surah Al-Isra, verse 44, تُسَبِّحُ لَهُ السَّمَاوَاتُ سَبْعُ وَالْأَرْضُ وَمَنْ فِيهِنْ وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُمْ. That the seven heavens and the earth and all that is therein glorify Allah, and there is not a single thing except it glorifies Allah. وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِحَهُمْ. But they do not understand, but you do not understand their glorification. إِنَّهُ كَانَ حَلِيمًا غَفُورًا. Truly Allah is most compassionate, most forgiving. So what we're getting from this verse in the Quran is that every single thing, as soon as a thing can be called a thing, as soon as it enters into existence, it is recognizing Allah and it is praising and glorifying Him. The next important thing is that Allah doesn't only know about each human being or each animal or each planet. Allah knows each of the particles that make up that complete unit. So if there are 7 million trillion atoms that make up a human being, Allah not only knows the human being, not only knows you and I, but each of the 7 million trillion atoms that make us up, Allah knows each one of those atoms. Not only that, each of those atoms only exist in particle form because it's being observed. And because this experiment works with electrons and photons, which are even smaller, Allah knows each of those particles as well. And the fact that we exist is being proven from quantum physics, that this only happens because there is someone that is observing us. But not only are we being observed, this is in a clear record. And Allah says to us beautifully in the Quran in Surah Yunus verse 61, وَمَا تَكُونُ فِي شَأْنٍ. And it doesn't matter what you're busy doing. وَمَا تَتْلُ مِنْهُ مِنْ قُرْآنٍ. And whatever portion of the Quran you are reciting, وَلَا تَعْمَلُونَ مِنْ عَمَلٍ. And whatever affair you're busy with, إِلَّا كُنَّا عَلَيْكُمْ شُهُودًا إِذْ تُفِيدُونَ فِي. Except we are witnesses thereover when you're busy doing it. Then Allah says very powerfully, وَمَا يَعْزُبُ عَنْ رَبِّكَ مِن مِثْقَالِ ذَرَةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا فِي السَّمَاءِ. And nothing escapes your Lord, not even the weight of an atom in the heavens and the earth. And this is a miracle of the Quran, because as we said earlier, it was only discovered that the atom had parts smaller in it just over 100 years ago. And it was only when they discovered the nucleus of the atom in 1911 that they discovered or learned that the atom has weight. But the Quran has told us that 1437 years ago. And then Allah says, وَلَا أَصْغَرَ مِنْ ذَلِكَ وَلَا أَكْبَرَ. And nothing smaller than the atom or bigger, إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مُبِينٍ, except it's in a clear register. Now only in 1897 scientists discovered the electron in the atom. But Allah is saying nothing bigger or smaller. Allah is telling us 1400 years ago of things smaller than an atom, because for 2,500 years the smallest thing known to humankind was the atom. And atom comes from the Greek word atomos, which means uncuttable, because the Greeks believed that at some point you get a particle which can't be cut further, and then they called it atomos. But Allah told us that there are particles smaller, and not only does Allah know them, but they in a clear record. So this is the extent of the power and control Allah has over the universe, right down to the smallest particles that make up everything in existence is in the knowledge and the control of Allah. And not only that, it's in a clear register. If somebody has a business and all his stock is on computer and recorded down, then that is a level of efficiency higher than a man that has a business that doesn't have everything recorded. The next thing, each and every particle responds to His command. If Allah is observing each of the particles and all of them are in a clear record, then these particles cannot move except if Allah permits them. Allah says, لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَإِلَى اللَّهِ تُرْجَعُ الْأُمُورِ. Allah is the dominion of the heavens and the earth, and to Allah return all matters for decision. And when we understand this that Allah commands each and every particle individually, then we begin to understand the power of this verse. إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. That indeed his command when he intends a thing is only that he says to it be, and it is. Because Allah commands all the particles instantly. So whereas with human beings, if they want to accomplish anything, it has to go through a process. If you want to make a cup of tea, you first have to boil the water, then put in the tea bag, and then add the milk, and then mix it, and then you have a cup of tea. But if you commanded each of the particles individually, and each one did its bidding immediately, then instantly you have the cup of tea. And this is why when Allah wants to create a thing, He just says be, and it is. And this is why cosmologists are confirming the reality that in the first second of the universe, more things happened than in the 13.8 billion years that followed, because everything followed Allah's instruction all at the same time. We'll just watch a quick 48-second video just to give us an understanding of the power when Allah commands something.
The most momentous second in history, the first.
In that first moment of creation, in the first second, space and time, matter and energy, everything was set into motion.
Space and time burst into existence, giving birth to the universe.
More things happened in that first second than will probably happen in the entire future history of the universe, no matter how long it lives.
This violent first second will define everything, including you.
So that very first second, understanding that is the key to understanding the universe itself.
The next thing we look at is the role of man in this whole equation, because obviously it's the man that's carrying out the experiment, and it would appear that he's the one that's collapsing the wave function. But the first thing we have to take into account is that this world functions on these rules, on the rules of the quantum world, that all things are formed by atoms, which are determined by the number of electrons, which are determined by the photons, and so forth. And this universe predates man by billions of years. So if man was the super conscious observer, then who was observing the universe before he appeared? And if we, for example, were to put a seed into the ground, who's observing it? Because what quantum physicists have arrived at is few strange theories, but two of the popular ones is that things exist only when man observes them. So when man is not looking at the thing, it doesn't exist. And when he looks at it, it exists. And this is why Einstein famously said, I'd like to think that the moon is still there even when I'm not looking at it. And this is why quantum physicists ask the question, if a leaf falls in a forest, does it make a sound? Meaning, if no one's observing it, does it behave like a particle? And then the second, more outrageous theory is that when no one's looking, everything exists in waveform, and because a wave spreads or in all directions, it means there are millions and millions of galaxies side by side, and we exist in millions and millions of galaxies. But this we know is not consistent with the Quran and the Sunnah, so we will not even entertain that argument. Obviously, Niels Bohr developed what he called the Copenhagen interpretation, which meant things exist in particle form only because they are being observed. So what we have to look at is what the Quran says. Allah says in the Quran in Surah Al-An'am, وَعِنْدَهُ مَفَاتِحُ الْغَيْبِ, and with him only are the keys to the unseen. لَا يَعْلَمُهَا إِلَّا هُ, no one knows it except him. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ, and he knows what is in the earth and what is in the sea. وَمَا تَسْقُطُ مِنْ وَرَقَةٍ إِلَّا يَعْلَمُهَا. And look at this beautiful verse. And not even a leaf falls except that he knows it. Quantum physicists are asking, if a leaf falls, does it make a sound, meaning no one's observing? Allah is saying, and not even a leaf falls except I know about it. وَلَا حَبَّةٍ فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْأَرْضِ وَلَا رَطْبٍ وَلَا يَابِسٍ إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مُبِينٍ. And there is not even a seed in the darkness of the ground, meaning where no one is looking at it, whether it's ripe or dry, except it's in a clear register. So if man was the observer, then what causes the seed to grow in the ground? These organisms that they find in the oceans after thousands of years, what caused them to evolve and to grow? The light that is coming from the planets billions of light years away, what was observing them at the time when they emitted the light, which is reaching us now only so many billions of years later? This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala observing everything in the universe and keeping it in existence. The other important thing is that the observer has to predate the universe. Otherwise, this universe, which is based on these laws, could not exist. So, the power that is observing and keeping everything in existence has to predate the universe and has to be external to it. Has to be independent of this universe and its rules. And Allah says in Surah Al-Hadid, هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن وهو بكل شيء عليم. That He is the first before anything, and He is the last after everything. والظاهر, and He is ascendant. والباطن, and He is the knower of hidden things. وهو بكل شيء عليم, and He has knowledge over all things. But the conscious intention of man does have an effect on the subatomic particle, because he does collapse the wave function, and it is consistent with the Quran and the Hadith. Indeed, the first Hadith we find in Bukhari, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that actions are according to their intentions. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى, and every man will be rewarded according to what he has intended. And in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, نِيَّةُ رَجُلِ أَبْلَغَ مِنْ عَمَلِهِ, that the niyyah of a man will get him further than his actions. So we understand that man has the ability to program into the subatomic world, but it's up to Allah whether He will permit what He has programmed or not. Allah says in Surah Al-Taghabun, مَا أَصَابَ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ, that there is not a single thing that can happen except with the permission of Allah. And where is the source of intent? This is very important for our future discussions, because obviously the first thing we would think that it's the mind, and obviously the human mind does have an effect in the thought process, but where is the source of it? Allah says to us in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم. Allah will not call you to account for what is unintentional in your oaths, ولكن يؤاخذكم بما كسبت قلوبكم, but He will take you to account for what your hearts have earned. Wallahu ghafurun halim, and Allah is most forgiving, most forbearing. So the important thing we have to understand here is that the heart is emitting the energy which is interacting with the particle and programming information into it, which will become clearer when we discuss the next two experiments in quantum physics, the quantum eraser theory and quantum entanglement. So our conclusions, now that we know what we know, what is it that we should be deriving? What are the lessons and the awareness that we should be deriving from this? First of all, everything in the universe, including you and I, exists only because we are being observed. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to cease observing us, we will not exist. So at any point when we're just focusing on ourselves, it should immediately draw our attention to the fact that Allah is watching us. When we look at everything around us, everything that we possess, not even despite or forget about the fact that Allah has given it to us, the first thing is it exists only because Allah is observing it. Each particle that makes up this object that you have in your possession is under the direct control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we understand this, how conscious should we not be in our everyday activities? Because Allah's observation of us is the same whether we're in the haram in Mecca, or in our masjid at Jum'ah time, or when we on a holiday. But why is it we say we know that Allah is all hearing and all seeing and all knowing, but why would we behave differently when we're in the masjid than when we're out on holiday? Why is our speech different when we're in our businesses, or when we're amongst our friends, than when we are amongst the people we respect, or when we're in the masjid? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is observing us as powerfully, irrespective of where we are in the universe. So this is to bring this consciousness of Ihsan into our lives, the fact that Allah is watching everything. This is why in the hadith Jibril, when Jibril asked the Prophet ﷺ, وَمَا الْإِحْسَانِ قال, the Prophet ﷺ said, when Jibril asked the Prophet ﷺ, what is Ihsan? The Prophet ﷺ replied, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَوْهُ, that you worship Allah as if you see Him. فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَوْهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَوْكَ, because if you don't see Him, indeed He sees you. Now when you understand the depth and the extent and the comprehensiveness of Allah's vision and Allah's witnessing us, then we have to become conscious about every single thought, let alone word that emits from this mouth, and action. We should be taking ourselves to account for our thoughts and our speech and our action. The next important conclusion: nothing escapes the control of Allah. His power extends right down to the smallest of particles. So why is it then that we would not put our trust completely in Allah? This demands tawakkul. Why is it that we would look to the banks for some form of outcome, or look to haram transactions like insurance policies or medical insurances to safeguard and protect us? Allah is in control of everything, right down to the smallest particles in the universe. If another human being is going to come and harm you, his atoms in his body can't move without the permission of Allah. So why don't we seek the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Like Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was flying to the fire, and Jibreel alayhi salam came to say, Ya Ibrahim, can I assist you? Ibrahim alayhi salam said, did Allah send you? He said, no, I came on my own. Ibrahim alayhi salam said, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for me and the best one to take care of my affairs. So this is what it should be taking us to. Why in our business do we find one Muslim wants to cut out his brother Muslim from access to goods, or trying to outbid him or undercut him, when he knows that everything is in the control of Allah? This should lead us to deep tawakkul and to dua, to isti'ana, that if we're seeking something, ask the authority that is control of every particle, because He's the only one that can deliver it to you. The third important thing: man has been given the ability to affect matter through his intention, his speech and his actions. We've learned that at the fundamental level everything is energy, and man emits energy. The heart is an emitter of energy. Sound is an emission of energy. The eye is an emitter of energy. This is why we have, the Prophet ﷺ said, Musibatul ayn haq, that the affliction of the evil eye is true. The Prophet ﷺ taught us to have beautiful intentions, beautiful speech. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, Al-haya'u min al-imani, that modesty is from iman. Wal-imanu fil jannati, and iman is in Jannah. Wal-badha'u min al-jafa'i, and vulgarity is from crudeness. وَالْبَذَاءُ مِنَ الْجَفَاءِ وَالْجَفَاءُ فِي النَّارِ, and crudeness is in the fire. So this tongue has the ability to emit actions and have consequences to matter around it, and we will be taken to account. The Prophet ﷺ said that when a man stands to pray, or three people stand up to pray, and one calls the adhan, all the trees and stones and rocks around them will bear testimony on their behalf on Yawm al-Qiyamah as to the fact that they performed salah. So we know that the palm tree cried in the Masjid al-Nabawi. It was affected by the presence of the Prophet ﷺ. We know that the camel complained to the Prophet ﷺ. So man has the ability to affect everything around him. This is why we've been taught to say Bismillah before we do anything, because it brings barakah, it brings positive energy into whatever it is being applied to. And this brings us to the last point of this discussion, that at the fundamental level, light and matter have the same source, that is energy or light. So when we do beautiful actions, the result is light. And when we do bad actions, the result is the absence of light. So our thoughts and our speech and our actions can generate light, or they can bring about the absence of light. Or we can say our speech and our intentions and our actions can generate beautiful actions, ihsan, or ugly actions, su. And when we understand the power with which Allah is observing us, then that should lead us to only one philosophy and one course of action, and that is to bring ihsan into every single aspect of our lives. And where would we learn this philosophy? Where would we learn the science of developing and infusing ihsan into everything we do? Allah told us, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, you have in the Messenger of Allah the example of ihsan. And then what does Allah say? هَلْ جَزَاءُ الْإِحْسَانِ إِلَّا الْإِحْسَانِ. Are you going to get any reward for these beautiful actions except beautiful actions that come back to you? So I hope inshallah that our understanding of the double-slit experiment will enhance our understanding of the power of Allah's witnessing over everything in creation, will make us more conscious of our thoughts, more conscious of our speech, and more conscious of our actions, and inshallah help us to learn more meaningful lives. Inshallah, in the next section we will discuss another very important concept, the quantum eraser theory. Sadaqallahu al-Azim, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.